350 years after the death of Joshua, the children of Israel had become very complacent. They just accepted the fact that the Philistines ruled over them and hardly resisted them at all. And they had no great appreciation of their God. That was all history, the things that God had done in the past. And so the Lord intervened by bringing a hero among them, Samson. Samson was dedicated to the Lord from his birth. The Lord used him to resist the Philistines. That resistance first came when he wanted to marry a Philistine girl, and the outcome of that was the death of over 1,000 Philistines at the hand of Samson, and Samson being recognised as judge in Israel. And he judged Israel for 20 years. We continue the story in Judges chapter 16. Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there, and went in to her. When the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, In the morning, when it is daylight, we will kill him. And Samson lay low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 gateposts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Afterward it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, Entice him, and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, Please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you. And Samson said, If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, I shall become weak, and be like any other man. So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. Now men were lying in wait, staying with her in the room. And she said to him, The Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he broke the bowstrings, as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, Look, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me what you may be bound with. So he said to her, If they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak, and be like any other man. Therefore Delilah took new ropes, and bound him with them, and said to him, The Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men were lying in wait, staying in the room, but he broke them off his arms like a thread. Delilah said to Samson, Until now you have mocked me, and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with. And he said to her, If you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom. So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom, and said to him, The Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep, and pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. Then she said to him, How can you say, I love you, when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and have not told me where your great strength lies. And it came to pass, when she pestered him daily with her words, and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart, and said to her, No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak, and be like any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, Come up at once, for he has told me all his heart. So the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hand. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees, and called for a man, and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." So he awoke from his sleep, and said, "I will go out as before, at other times, and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Then the Philistines took him, and put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. However, the hair of his head began to grow again, after it had been shaven. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, "Our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy." When the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, "Our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead." So it happened, when their hearts were merry, that they said, "Call for Samson, that he may perform for us." So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them. And they stationed him between the pillars. And Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, "Let me feel the pillars which support the temple, so that I can lean on them." Now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men and women on the roof, watching while Samson performed. Then Samson called to the Lord, saying, "O Lord God, remember me, I pray, strengthen me. I pray just this once, O Lord, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." And Samson took hold of the 2 pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on his right and the other on his left. Then Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he pushed with all his might. And the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he killed in his life. And his brothers and all his father's household came down and took him, and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel 20 years. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we look at the wonder of this story. A man that God stood beside. What was the secret of Samson's strength? It really was that God stood by him and gave him that strength. It was the mighty Spirit of God that enabled him to do these things. It wasn't anything in himself. And he could have plainly said that to Delilah, "My strength lies in my God." But his hair was a sign that he was a Nazirite. It was a symbol. A person who was a Nazirite let their hair grow. And if they were defiled, they had to shave their head, and Samson had been defiled in his life, and start all over again. And of course this is what happened with Samson here. They shaved his head when they realized that was the sign. But even then he didn't explain very clearly that it was God who gave him the strength. In fact, he had grown so comfortable with the strength that he took it to himself. And so when his hair was cut, he didn't realize immediately that his strength had gone from him. But the Lord withdrew his strength, and he became like another man. But that led the Philistines to think they had the victory. Their God was stronger. They humiliated Samson, poking out his eyes, making him operate the threshing floor as if he was a beast. They praised their god Dagon, which would not do at all. While they celebrate and worship their God, he calls upon his God to remember him and to allow him to take vengeance for the loss of his eyes. The Lord gives him the strength to push the 2 pillars on which the whole structure stands. The whole lot collapses. What is remarkable is that the Lord stood by Samson. We see his weakness for women. It was the occasion of all of his interactions with the Philistines, and the Lord enabled Samson to take vengeance on those who did him wrong. God's purpose was that Samson would remind the children of Israel that there is a God in heaven who can do mighty things, and he works through people, ordinary, weak people, who have no special spirituality, but who are dedicated to God.